Chapter 1873. When he saw the black-robed youth looking down expressionlessly, he looked away and leaned back in his chair. He looked at Han Rong lazily. Back then, when you used the spirit or to trade with me to destroy the Phoenix dynasty, you didn't say that we would help you clean up after the matter, nor did you say that we would help you kill the remaining people. Hearing the man's deep and cold voice, Han Rong immediately narrowed his eyes. I don't dare. I'm only here to tell the palace master the news. I don't dare to ask for the palace master's help. Oomph. The black-robed man snorted coldly and narrowed his sharp eyes. Han Rong, don't think that I don't know what you're up to. Back then, you were just a servant by Xianyuan Mo's side, but you bullied your master and had your cultivation crippled and chased out. If your current master hadn't helped you take over his body, you wouldn't be able to stand in front of me. Who gave you the right to not kneel in front of me? Who gave you the courage to use me? That malicious voice was accompanied by a powerful aura, causing Han Rong's heart to jump in shock. The aura of death enveloped him in an instant, causing his legs to go weak, and he knelt down. No, I don't dare. He actually knows. He actually knows that I've taken over his body. He even knows that I was originally Xianyuan Mo's servant. How'd he find out? At this moment, Feng Jiu was also shocked when she heard this. She stared at Han Rong, unable to believe that this person was the Han Rong whose cultivation had been crippled by Xianyuan Mo's. It's him? So it's him. He was the one who had taken revenge and destroyed her Phoenix dynasty, caused so many Phoenix guards to die in battle, caused her grandfather and grandmother to suffer so much, and even caused her little uncle to die because of this calamity. Looking at the person below, murderous intent surged in her heart. She wanted nothing more than to kill him. The black-robed man glanced at Han Rong, who was kneeling before him, and said coldly, Next time, even if you have such news, you don't have to come and tell me. My Temple of Darkness is not a place where you can come and go whenever you want. Yes, then I'll take my leave first. Han Rong lowered her head. Perhaps she was afraid of his pressure, but at this moment, she didn't even dare to raise her head. Just like that, she got up and left with her head lowered. It wasn't until she was a distance away from the palace that she let out a light breath. She steadied her rapidly beating heart and quickly left. Only someone like him who had experienced death and despair knew how wonderful it was to be alive. It was precisely because of this that he cherished everything he had now. As for Feng Jiu and the others, he would not let them off so easily. Number 9. After Han Rong left, the black-robed man casually called out, Your subordinate is here. Feng Jiu jumped down and bowed respectfully. You know him? The black-robed man narrowed his eyes and stared sharply at the youth standing in front of him, not missing a trace of expression that flashed across the youth's face. In reply to Master, Your subordinate has seen him before. Feng Jiu said calmly, Oh, is that so? Where did you see him? He raised his eyebrows, indicating for him to continue. Chapter 1874. The black-robed man didn't ask further. He just quietly glanced at the black-clothed youth in front of him and waved his hand to signal him to leave. Feng Jiu didn't return to the pillar this time. Instead, he stood at the back and silently restrained his aura. On this day, other than the people he saw, nothing else happened. It wasn't until evening when the black-robed man brought the old man out of the palace and left Feng Jiu behind that she had time to move around. However, although she didn't follow the black-robed man, she didn't leave immediately. After all, there were still many pairs of eyes watching her in the dark. She couldn't afford to be careless. Although she didn't walk around alone for the past 2 days, she had been to many places with the black-robed man and was familiar with the place. At this time, she took the opportunity to relieve herself. After walking for a while, she met the spies who were led away. Because she wasn't wearing a mask, they recognized her when she walked out. When she passed by, Lei Zhao's hand moved slightly and handed the thing hidden in her sleeve to Feng Jiu. She didn't even turn around and continued to walk forward. Feng Jiu moved his hand and threw the thing into the space. He walked away. When she reached a place where there was no one, she opened the thing and saw that it was a map of this place. Could it be that they had already walked out of here? In just 2 days, he had even finished drawing the map? Her heart moved. She took out a pen and paper from his space and wrote down a note. She only had to wait for the right time to hand it to them. After putting away the things, she walked outside and looked around. In another palace, the black-robed man looked at the old man and asked, "What do you think of this number 9? Hearing this, the old man was slightly startled. This wasn't his first time. He couldn't help but ask, "Young master, do you think there's something wrong? I do think it's a little strange. However, since it's someone who took the heart-eroding pill, there shouldn't be any doubt. However, this number 9 gives me a different feeling from the others." The black-robed man said thoughtfully. He couldn't tell what was different. Haha, it's said that this number 9 was originally the weakest, but he still had some extraordinary aspects. Take this incident, for example. It's said that Elder Ghost didn't like him at first, so he released his contracted beast to tear that number 9 apart. Who would have thought that number 9 would actually survive from the jaws of Elder Ghost's contracted beast with a pair of extremely fast legs? The old man smiled. It is precisely because of this that number 9 was left behind. According to our people, he personally watched every spy take the heart-eroding pill. Even if young master has doubts in his heart, the poison of the heart-eroding pill is something that even the people of the 4 great sects may not be able to cure, so that he didn't continue. What he meant was that even if they were suspicious under the poisonous effect of the heart-eroding pill, even if they harbored disloyalty, they wouldn't be able to do anything. That's right, the black-robed man said. Obviously, he didn't take this matter to heart. He did things according to his heart. If he found the young man interesting, he would tease him. So what if he had ulterior motives? In the palm of his hand, could he turn the sky upside down? However, he didn't expect that his overconfidence at this time would cause him to suffer heavy losses in the near future. Chapter 1875. She came to the center of the spies and glanced at them. She passed the note in her hand to number 1, then walked forward a few steps before stopping. She looked at the middle-aged man in front of her who was giving orders to them. She released her divine sense and sensed that other than a few shadow guards, there were no other strong cultivators watching them. Thus, her gaze swept past the spies. With a glance, she signaled them to move closer to the center. "You all, MM." Just as she spoke, the middle-aged man's eyes widened. His body went limp and fell. However, he didn't fall to the ground. Instead, he was supported by the shadow guard beside him. "Rong-san," she called out. "Yes," Rong-san replied in a low voice. He came to Feng-Jio's side. "Deal with him. You can change his identity so that it's easier for you to do things." Feng-Jio ordered. He passed a bottle of medicine to Rong-san. "Go down to the water source." "Okay," Rong-san replied. He put away the medicine and helped the man leave. Feng-Jio looked at the crowd and said in a low voice, "Everyone be alert. We'll act by tomorrow night at the latest." The crowd didn't reply. They nodded and quickly split up. At this time, she turned to leave. She glanced around and noticed that the shadow guards in the distance didn't notice them. Not long after she returned to the palace, the man in the black robe came back. After entering, he looked at number 9 who was in the dark and called out, "Number 9, your subordinate is here." She walked out with her head slightly lowered. "After I left, have you been here all this time?" He stared at the young man. "Your subordinate didn't. When I went out to relieve myself, I walked around." She said honestly, she believed that even if she didn't say it, he would know where she went. Perhaps because Feng-Jio didn't hide it. He didn't suspect anything. He just nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Until the next evening, a middle-aged man came to the palace with sweat on his forehead. "Master, it's not good. Something happened. Speak." The person in the main seat glanced at the person below. Since noon, there have been many problems with people. All of them are unconscious and foaming at the mouth. After checking, they have been poisoned. I'm afraid that someone has snuck in. This subordinate found that someone has poisoned our water source. The middle-aged man said anxiously. His heart was filled with fear as he wiped his sweat from time to time. Hearing this, the man in the black robe frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. This is the main hall of the Dark Knight Temple. How could someone have snuck in? And without a sound? Master, it's bad. The fire is very big. It's out of control. The old man walked in and shouted with a panicked expression. With that, the black-robed man stood up with a swish and walked outside. As soon as he exited the palace, he saw smoke and flames rising from the palace below. Chaotic noises spread through the air as well. "Investigate it for me. Who the hell is it?" he said in a gloomy voice. Suddenly, as if he thought of something, his eyes narrowed and he looked behind him. The old man saw him looking behind him. He didn't know what he was looking for, so he asked, "Master, what's wrong? What are you looking for?" Chapter 1876. Where's the young man? His voice rang out as if he was talking to himself. However, when the few people in the dark heard his words, they were suddenly stunned. Only at this moment did they realize that the black-clothed young man had actually disappeared without a trace. Hearing no sound, the man in black narrowed his eyes. Find him along with the other spies. Yes, this time, the voices of the people hiding in the shadows could be heard. At this moment, the man in black strode out. His feet did not touch the ground as he quickly walked towards the spies. If he still did not know where the problem was, he would have lived in vain. However, he did not expect that the young man would dare to do so. How dare he? He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked. The anger in his heart had reached its peak. At this moment, if he saw the young man, he would definitely twist his head off. At this moment, Feng Jiu was in the forest behind a palace. This was one of the exits. At this moment, other than the 16 spies who were sent away to infiltrate the 4 major sects, the rest were all present. Is everyone here? Feng Jiu looked at the crowd and glanced at their faces that had taken off their masks. Reporting to leader, other than the 16 spies who were sent away earlier, the rest are all present. Lei Xiao reported. Very good. Since everyone is here, leave along the mountain path immediately. After leaving this area, split into 4 groups and leave. Remember what I told you. Gather at the designated location within 3 days. Yes, everyone replied in a low voice. However, they were still a little confused and could not help but ask, "Leader, are we leaving just like that? Are we not going to kill them? It's such a pity to let them go." They thought that they could have a good battle here. Who knew that their leader's order was to set fire to the palace and bury those things in the various palaces? They did not know what they were for. Hearing this, Feng Jiu smirked. He raised his head and looked at the place where the fire was burning. We don't have to do anything. They will die without a burial place. Boom, 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 rumble. As if to prove her words, the moment she finished speaking, a loud rumble suddenly rang out. The power of the rumble was not inferior to the power of heavenly thunder. It abruptly rang out in the flames, followed by a series of rumbles. The power of the rumble was so great that it caused the air to tremble. Even the ground began to shake and crack. The people standing here only felt the mountains suddenly shake, and even they couldn't help but sway. After quickly stabilizing their feet, they couldn't help but look at the banging and rumbling sounds in shock, and their faces were filled with disbelief. Enough. Hurry up and leave. I've already broken through the barriers and formations here for you. You could just leave now. Let's go. She gestured for everyone to leave quickly. After all, although she did not choose to face the enemy head-on after the detonators were placed in the various palaces, this place was considered to be destroyed. Under the power of the detonators, the number of casualties would definitely be considerable. However, it was still impossible to truly injure those powerhouses who did not have medicine. Therefore, he could only ask them to leave as soon as possible so that they wouldn't encounter them head-on and cause unnecessary damage. Chapter 1877. Feng Jiu didn't leave immediately. She stood there and waited for Lei Xiao and the others to leave. She didn't leave, but turned around. The expression on her face gradually turned cold. Her clear eyes fell on the few figures who were heading towards her. No one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, although the black-robed man who was soaring through the air was wearing a mask, the murderous aura around him was almost soaring to the sky. Other than seeing the Temple of the Dark Knight, which had been blown into a mess by the explosion, when he rushed to the Darkchild camp to confirm, he was also thrown into a sorry state by the sudden explosion. Although it didn't hurt him, His black robe was stained with dust and smoke, and several holes were torn by the flying rocks. When he rushed to the Dark Child camp and saw that there wasn't a single spy there, he knew that the resources provided for these 3 months had all gone down the drain. Not only did they go down the drain, they even nurtured those people to become strong cultivators to deal with him. Thinking of this, one could imagine the anger around him, especially when he saw that black figure standing on a mountain path. His murderous aura soared to the sky. How did they cure the heart-eroding pill? If 1 or 2 people didn't take the heart-eroding pill, it was still acceptable. But it was impossible that more than 100 people didn't take the heart-eroding pill. It must have been cured by someone. Even the people from the 4 major sects couldn't cure the heart-eroding pill. So how did they cure it? In his heart, a person faintly appeared, and that was the ghost Dr. Fungio. In this world, who else could cure their heart-eroding pill other than her? Moreover, it was said that the ghost Dr. Fungio had come to the upper continent and even cured a true monarch of the Huasian sect's poison, but then disappeared without a trace. Now that he had seen all this, how could he not think of it? Only he never thought that this damned ghost Dr. Fungio would be so daring, actually daring to sneak in right under his nose. In a few blink of an eye, he arrived a dozen meters in front of the black-clothed youth. Around him, the few people who came with him stopped and naturally surrounded the black-clothed youth. The black-robed man narrowed his sharp eyes and stared at the person who was no longer concealing his aura. The young man no longer had his brows lowered and his eyes narrowed. Between his brows, there was a look of willfulness and confidence. His eyes were cold and deep. The aura around him changed. That aura caused his gaze to involuntarily move. Ghost Dr. Fungio. His deep voice was filled with viciousness. It wasn't a question, but an affirmation. His gaze was fixed on a youth in front of him. He watched as the corners of his lips curled up, revealing a devilish and wanton smile, as expected of the temple lord of the Dark Knight Temple. You guessed my identity so quickly. Fungio's lips curled into a cold smile. At the same time, she moved her hand and an ancient divine sword, Qing Feng, appeared in her hand. When the surrounding people heard their master's words, they were shocked. This young man was actually the ghost Dr. Fungio. The few people suppressed the shock in their hearts. Looking at the young man who didn't have a trace of feminine charm, they couldn't believe that such a wanton and ostentatious young man was actually a girl. What a ghost Dr. Fungio. What a princess of the Phoenix dynasty. Indeed, seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. He narrowed his eyes and stared at her handsome face. He knew that this wasn't her real face. Chapter 1878. Phoenix Dynasty? Huh. Fungio sneered and stared at the black-robed man in front of him. I have no enmity with your Temple of the Dark Knight, and we have nothing to do with each other. But you sent people to destroy my home and kill my family. How dare you mention the Phoenix Dynasty today? Her gaze swept across the people around her, and the corners of her mouth curled up. She said in a cold voice, I'll leave those people to you. Come out. As soon as her voice fell, several rays of light flashed, and then the 3 contracted beasts, Fire Phoenix, Lao Bai, and Tun Yun, appeared from the space. Roar, roar, roar. 3 roars came from the 3 beasts, and the powerful pressure in their voices formed 3 waves of air that rippled in the air and attacked the people around them. Tun Yun leaped up, and his majestic body stood behind Fungio, facing one of the middle-aged men. Fire Phoenix flapped its wings and hovered in the air, looking down. Lao Bai, although a dragon, was also a mutated beast. At this moment, it was coiled up in a tree and staring at another person. The 3 beasts appeared at the same time, and the pressure of the ancient and sacred beasts spread out. The invisible air current was like a mountain pressing down on the chests of the people. They felt a pressure on their heads and chests, and the blood in their bodies was in a mess. Ancient mythical beast Fire Phoenix, mutated beast unicorn White Dragon, sacred beast Tun Yun. When they saw the 3 contracted beasts, they sucked in a breath of cold air, exclaiming in unison. Their hearts were filled with shock as they stared at the 3 contracted beasts, and couldn't help but curse under their breaths. Damn it! How could Fengjiu have so many contracted beasts? Furthermore, they were so powerful. Not to mention that there were 3 in front of them. Even one of them would be difficult to deal with. Kill them for me. Fengjiu stared at the people and said, "Roar." The 3 contracted beasts responded with a roar, and in the next moment, they directly pounced on those people. The powerful pressure and their own airflow fused with each other, causing their speed to increase in an instant. The moment they rushed forward, the sharp airwaves in front of them also rushed out. When those people saw the 3 contract beasts attacking them, their faces couldn't help but change. They quickly retreated, trying not to fight them head-on to avoid being injured by the other party's powerful pressure. When the black-robed man saw this scene, he couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't expect that Fengjiu could contract so many contracted beasts, and all of them were so powerful. Just as he was thinking, he felt a fierce, murderous aura coming towards him. He suddenly came back to his senses and heard a cold voice. "Your opponent is me." Fengjiu held a green sword in her hand, and a sharp sword chi shot out when she attacked. It was very frightening. Her speed was extremely fast, and the distance of more than 10 meters was closed in the blink of an eye. Just as the green sword was about to pierce the man's forehead, the masked black-robed man turned around. "You overestimate yourself." A malicious voice came out from his mouth. The arrogance in his voice was very obvious. Obviously, he didn't think much of Fengjiu. No matter what, he didn't think that he would lose to a woman. Even if Fengjiu's reputation was very resounding, in his eyes, she was just a woman. Chapter 1879. As soon as she finished speaking, she spun the Qingfeng sword in her hand, and a ray of green light shot out, attacking the black-robed man in front of her. The black-robed man did not hesitate. With a move of his hand, a long sword appeared in his hand as well. He injected his spiritual power into the long sword and dissipated the ray of green light. At the same time, the tip of the sword turned and faced Fengjiu. Clang! Whoosh! The 2 swords collided and produced a clear clang. 2 wind blades diffused from the swords, neither giving way to the other. Due to the surge of spiritual power and the spread of pressure, the sand on the ground was swept up and the fallen leaves fluttered in the air. At this moment, Fengjiu did not hide her strength. However, the black-robed man's strength was not inferior to hers. Seeing that the 2 streams of air were equally matched, she immediately shot out 3 silver needles with her other hand. The black-robed man narrowed his eyes. As he dodged to the side, he heard the sound of the silver needles brushing past his ears. He formed a palm with his left hand and suddenly attacked Fengjiu with a stream of air. When the stream of air attacked, it instantly turned into an ice blade and attacked Fengjiu's face. Seeing this, Fengjiu lifted her leg and kicked. As her opponent retreated to dodge, she waved the Qingfeng sword in front of her. A ray of flame shot out from the Qingfeng sword and instantly melted the ice blade, turning it into steam and disappearing into the air. Seeing that Fengjiu waved her sword and shot out a ray of flame, the black-robed man narrowed his eyes and frowned under his mask. His attribute was ice, but Fengjiu's attribute was fire. Fire countered ice. No matter how fierce his attack was, it would probably be easily resolved by her. Looking at Fengjiu, who was holding the Qingfeng sword, his gaze fell on the Qingfeng sword. If the sword was used well, it could greatly increase one's strength. If it was not for the fact that the sword in his hand was not ordinary, he was afraid that he would not have been able to withstand the attack just now. It seemed that if he wanted to take her down, he would have to end the battle quickly. He did not believe that his contracted beast would dare to continue fighting after taking her down. Swish! Sword chi shot out, 1 white and 1 green. 2 streams of chi collided with each other, forming a huge vortex. 2 black figures flew up and fought in the vortex. Because they were too fast, they couldn't see the situation inside. They only knew that streams of sword chi shot out from the vortex. When they hit the ground, they made a loud bang and cut a deep trench in the ground. Ah! A blood-curdling scream rang out. They originally thought that it came from Fengjiu and the others, but to their surprise, when they looked in the direction of the sound, they saw a middle-aged man being bitten on the neck by Tan Yun. Blood gushed out as he cried out in pain. Crack! That person did not have time to call for help, nor did he have time to wait for others to come to his senses and save him. His neck was bitten off by Tan Yun. When the sound of bones breaking rang out, that person's head fell to the side powerlessly. Even in death, his eyes were still wide open in fear. Bang! That person was tossed to the side by Tan Yun, and then Tan Yun pounced toward the two people that were attacking Senior White. A shrill scream tore through the sky. Flames shot out from the Fire Phoenix's mouth and transformed into a fire dragon that coiled around a middle-aged man. He desperately tried to extinguish the flames on his body. His body rolled on the ground, but the flames burned at an extremely fast speed, and the raging flames instantly swallowed him up. Chapter 1880. Even contracted beasts had different levels of power. Even though the two contracted beasts were divine beasts, under the pressure of a sacred beast and an ancient divine beast, the two battle beasts' legs turned to jelly. They did not dare to fight and only dared to lie on the ground, trembling. When the two cultivators saw this, they almost spat out a mouthful of blood. They had originally wanted to call their two contracted beasts out to help, but who knew that the two savage contracted beasts were like children in front of the ancient divine beast and the sacred beast. They did not even dare to roar. Pong! One of them was suddenly swung by Lao Bai's dragon tail and was thrown out heavily. Pooh! Spitting out a mouthful of blood, that person spun a few times on the ground. He wanted to stand up, but a flame shot towards him. He was so shocked that he rolled on the ground to avoid it. Who knew that he would be stepped on by the sacred beast who had leaped over? And that person groaned, his body curled up and spasmed. He felt as if his internal organs had been trampled by the sacred beast. On the other side, the whirlpool was filled with the smell of fresh blood. The two of them did not stop and continued to spin with the whirlpool. It was unknown who was injured until, after a groan, one of them was kicked out of the whirlpool. Pong! Pooh! His body fell heavily to the ground, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The person who fell to the ground was not Fengjiu, but the black-robed man without a doubt. The mask on his face made a cracking sound, as if it was about to split open. His body was also heavily injured, especially the last attack, which had injured his lungs, making it difficult for him to breathe. The whirlpool gradually subsided, and Fengjiu's figure gradually became clearer. Just as she was about to attack again, who knew that the black-robed man stood up and waved his robes, leaving behind sentence. Fengjiu, we will meet again. As his voice fell, a ray of light flashed, and in the next moment, his entire person disappeared into thin air. Seeing this, Fengjiu frowned slightly. She had actually let him escape. She had thought that she could take him down, but who knew that? With a final scream, the person who had lasted until the very end finally turned into ashes and was blown away by the wind. After finishing off all the enemies, the three contracted beasts glanced at each other and stepped forward to Fengjiu's side. Master, I've killed them all. Lao Bai wagged his tail as if he was asking for credit. His eyes narrowed, as if he was waiting for Fengjiu's praise. Rumbling sounds came from all around the palace in the distance. It sounded like the rumbling caused by the explosion of air hitting the mountain rocks, but also like the rumbling of the palace collapsing. At this time, Fengjiu only narrowed his eyes and looked up, then said to the three beasts, "Let's go." "Yes." The three beasts answered and leaped into the space. After leaving the forest, she went to the place where she had agreed to meet them. About a day later, in a town, have you heard? The Dark Knight Temple's main hall was actually destroyed. A male cultivator lowered his voice and said to the people at the same table. Chapter 1881. What kind of power could be so fierce? They even dared to destroy the headquarters of the Dark Knight Temple? Could it be those demonic cultivators? Who knows? The Dark Knight Temple isn't a righteous person. Maybe they provoked some powerful power and got destroyed. You don't know, but the fire there burned for an entire night. and there's a huge crater on the ground. With that power, I reckon that it was definitely an expert among experts who could leave behind such an attack. However, the news has spread in just a day. Many people have gone to take a look. However, I heard that they can't enter that place anymore. It should be because the enchantments and formations have been reset. I think that the Palace Master is still alive. The Dark Knight Temple is so powerful. Even if their headquarters were destroyed, it's impossible for them to perish. Moreover, as long as their Temple Master doesn't die, the Dark Knight Temple's power won't disperse. That's true. But if it was destroyed once, will there be a second time? A second time? Then there's only a chance if someone can enter. In the corner, Fungio, dressed in green, was drinking wine and eating meat as if he didn't hear those people. God knows how long she had been craving for it. It wasn't easy to finally be free, so she naturally had to eat her fill first. Waiter, prepare 2 roasted chickens for me to take out. She drank a mouthful of wine and shouted, "Okay." The waiter smiled and squinted his eyes. He went to the back to give orders and busied himself at the guest table. Suddenly, the laughter and chatter quieted down. Fungio, who was eating in the corner, looked up and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. For beautiful women walked in from the outside. The reason why everyone on the first floor fell silent was not only because of their dazzling appearance, but also because of their voluptuous and exquisite figures. Most of the people in the restaurant were male cultivators and some of the wealthier people in the town. Even though they had seen many beauties, they couldn't help but stare. The 4 beauties seemed to have long been used to such gazes. Some of them smiled sweetly at the crowd while others had tender eyes, as if they wanted to say something but were shy. "Waiter, give us a private room." One of the women with a seductive smile called out to the waiter, who was staring blankly at them. Fengju looked away after a glance and continued to eat her food. These 4 women all had surging spiritual energy. They were indeed cultivators, but they were wearing different colored gauze instead of the sex uniform. Also, these 4 women all had seductive looks on their faces. It was clear that they weren't righteous people. She had met the 2 seductive women from the all-pleasure sect in the training grounds. Their expressions were no different from these people. She reckoned that they might really be seductive women from the all-pleasure sect. "I'm Fairy. There are no more private rooms. The 4 private rooms upstairs are all available. Would you like to take a private room on the 2nd floor? Just now, a table of customers left, and there's an empty table. You can also see the scenery of the street." The waiter said, his eyes not daring to look around. "How can there be no private rooms? Why don't we go upstairs and ask if there are any guests who are willing to give up their private rooms for the 4 of us?" One of the women smiled sweetly and walked up to the 2nd floor without waiting for the waiter to speak. Chapter 1882. This. The waiter was stunned and looked at the shopkeeper at a loss. The shopkeeper frowned slightly and walked out. He quickly walked up the stairs and stopped the 4 ladies. "Ladies, I'm afraid this is inappropriate." "Oh? Why is it inappropriate? We sisters want a better environment to eat. Can't we do that, shopkeeper? If it weren't for the fact that your restaurant is the most famous in the city and that your signature dishes are the best, we wouldn't have come all the way here." The woman at the front spoke in a tender voice. Her voice was soft and gentle, causing the men below to feel their bones melt. Not to mention, the woman's coquettish eyes had a trace of grievance. That kind of coquettish expression that made people feel pity for her made the men below unable to help but open their mouths. "Shopkeeper, why are you stopping them? If these ladies want a private room, why don't you just ask someone to make room for them? Let these delicate beauties sit in the main hall and eat. Do you feel good about it? That's right, forget about us. Men eat wherever they go. These girls should have a private room, no matter what. What's more, who knows if the people in the private room will give up the private room to you ladies like us when they see you." The shopkeeper's expression didn't change as he listened to the people below. He only frowned and said to the ladies, "Ladies, it's not that I don't want to help you. It's just that the people in these 4 private rooms can't be offended. I'm doing this for your own good." As he spoke, he paused and thought for a while. "How about this? The guests in these 4 private rooms probably won't be sitting for too long. Why don't you go outside and look around to see if there's anything you want to buy? Come back later. I'll definitely reserve a private room for you." Unexpectedly, while he was talking to the lady, the three people behind him had already walked up. One of them even pushed open one of the doors and walked in. "Hey, ladies, you can't." Ah. Before the shopkeeper could finish his words, the woman who had walked in was sent flying out. She screamed as she lost her balance and fell from the second floor to the first floor. Bang! The woman fell onto a table, and the cultivator sitting at the table instantly took a few steps back. His eyes widened in shock as he watched the woman smash the table and throw it to the ground. Pooh! Blood spurted out from her mouth, and her delicate face instantly turned pale. She lay on the ground, unable to stand up even if she wanted to. Seventh junior sister. The other three recovered from their shock. One of them jumped down from the second floor and quickly came to the woman's side to help her up. "How are you? Were you hurt? Who hurt you?" At this time, the two women upstairs were filled with anger. Just as they were about to enter the room with the door open, they saw a person walk out. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s. He wore a black robe and had a robust physique. His face was upright and dignified. He walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. His body faintly exuded the imposing manner of a superior. Chapter 1883. The two women's hearts could not help but tremble under his sharp gaze. However, when they thought of their junior sister who was sent flying, they gritted their teeth and drew their swords from their waists. Seeing this, the man frowned. He took a step forward and began to fight with the two on the second floor. The two women were fighting the man with their swords, but the man did not even draw his weapon. Furthermore, he seemed to be dealing with them with ease. It was obvious that the man's strength was far above the two women's. When the shopkeeper saw this, he retreated from the stairs to avoid being affected. He shouted, "Hey, the three of you, please stop fighting, stop fighting." Whoosh! The flexible sword shot out a sword aura and slashed through the man's robe. A trace of blood seeped out from the man's arm and dyed his sleeve red. Seeing that they were injured, the man's face darkened. Originally, he did not want to kill them, but now, seeing that the two women were trying to kill him with every step they took, he naturally would not show mercy. "You're courting death." A low and cold voice came out of the man's mouth. He moved, and his speed instantly increased. When he charged forward, he grabbed one of the women's wrists and bent her hand downwards. The long sword in her hand fell to the ground. At the same time, he lifted her up and threw her down from the second floor. Ah! The woman who was lifted and thrown to the first floor cried out in alarm. She wanted to stabilize her body as she fell, but she lost her balance and could not turn around. It was also at this moment that the woman who was supporting the injured person on the first floor quickly flew up and caught the woman who was falling to the first floor. Third senior sister. The woman caught the person, but who knew that because of the speed and strength of the man who threw the person down the stairs, she could not stabilize her body. The two of them were pressed down by the invisible force and fell to the ground. The two of them fell to the ground and groaned. Because the force was blocked halfway, although they fell, they were not injured. Third senior sister. Take care of seventh junior sister. I'll go help eldest senior sister. As the woman spoke, she helped seventh junior sister up and leaped up to the second floor. When the diners on the first floor saw the fight, they didn't want to get into trouble, so they paid their bills and left early. There were also some who retreated to the door to watch. The only people left on the first floor were the two injured women and the Fungio, who was sitting in the corner eating meat and drinking wine. She couldn't be blamed for not noticing her. She was originally sitting in the corner, and now that everyone's attention was on the second floor, naturally no one noticed the corner on the first floor. Fungio took a sip of wine and picked up a piece of braised pork ribs to eat. He watched the fight on the second floor as if he was watching a show. That man was obviously hiding his strength. Not to mention the two women. Even if the four of them attacked together, they would not be a match for him. Moreover, her gaze fell on the other rooms on the second floor. The doors that were originally closed were unknowingly opened, and there were one or two people standing in front of each door, watching the fight. As for the people in the other wing, they didn't look like ordinary people from the town. From the way they held their swords in their arms, they were cultivators from other places. Could it be that they were here for the destroyed Temple of Darkness? However, at this moment there was a sudden scream. Chapter 1884. The woman's exclamation was laced with a hint of panic. When he heard the voice, Fengjiu looked towards a woman. When he saw the scene, he could not help but smile. She saw that the woman's dress had somehow fallen down to her waist, revealing her snow-white shoulders and graceful and enchanting back. Her snow-white skin was accentuated by the red doo embroidered with two mandarin ducks playing in the water, making her appear even more alluring and sexy. Her originally ample bosom was wrapped up by the doo and seemed to be on the verge of popping out. Not only was she stunned, even the people who had retreated to the door on the first floor were also stunned. Many people sucked in a breath of air, especially when they saw the woman's shy and enchanting expression. Some of the men on the first floor felt a warm current shoot up from their abdomens, straight to their heads, and two streams of blood flowed down their noses. Those people's eyes seemed to be glued to the woman's body, unable to move away for a long time. They could only feel their hearts thumping, somewhat agitated and somewhat excited. Their gazes were fixed on the plump chest and the thin string tied to the doo-doo, thinking, why isn't the string broken? If the string of the doo-doo were to break, that would be a truly beautiful scene. When the people at the doors of the other three rooms on the second floor saw the woman's exposed spring scenery, an inexplicable smile flashed across their faces. Their gazes swept over her body, from her slender shoulders to her beautiful back, all the way down to her faintly discernible waist and buttocks. Those curved curves made people's hearts burn, like a feather gently tickling their hearts. However, among these people, there was a man who took a few steps back the moment he saw the woman's dress slip. He closed his eyes and looked away, not looking at the spring scenery in front of him. Perhaps, in his eyes, it was not an alluring spring scenery. However, it was precisely because he took a few steps back and looked away that the woman took advantage of the opportunity. In an instant, the woman who had exclaimed lifted her skirt, pulled out a dagger from her thigh, and fiercely stabbed forward. The danger was approaching, and the man's killing intent was closing in. The man gathered strength in his palm and struck out, forcing the woman to take a few steps back. However, at this moment when the other two women saw this scene, they also flew forward. The three of them surrounded the man, gently pulling his belt, and took off his top to his waist, revealing different colored doo-doo. Yo, embarrassed to look? One of the women covered her red lips and smiled coquettishly. Looking at the man who was frowning and closing his eyes, she curled her lips disapprovingly. Why are you talking nonsense with him? Kill him. As the other person said this, he directly attacked. When the people on the first floor saw this scene, they could not help but sigh. His luck with women is not bad. This spring scenery is obviously delivered to your door, and you actually closed your eyes and didn't appreciate it. How foolish. The person next to him sneered and glanced at the person next to him. What do you know? Just by looking at that man's strength, cultivation, and clothes, we should know that he is not an ordinary person. Those few women probably won't be able to gain any advantage against him in the end. Of a decent woman, of a person's of a defeat, maybe he's a disciple of some evil sect. Chapter 1885. Fengjiu, who was in the corner, saw the scene upstairs and could not help but laugh. This was really interesting. However, the man was not stubborn. When he saw the four of them attacking him, he opened his eyes in the next moment and coldly glanced at the three women. His first move was a fatal move. One of the women was choked by the neck and lifted up by the man. The woman's face turned red as she struggled. Her legs kicked wildly, but she couldn't hurt the man at all. When the two people beside her saw this, they stabbed forward with their soft swords and daggers. However, they didn't expect the man to throw the woman towards them. The soft swords and daggers couldn't stop in time and stabbed into the woman's body. With a muffled groan, the woman's lips trembled slightly. Her eyes were wide open, and her body was twitching slightly. Blood flowed from her mouth. Junior's sister. The two of them cried out in alarm. They hugged the woman and watched her take her last breath in their arms. The two of them trembled slightly. Their hands were tightly clenched into fists. Their beautiful faces were full of coldness. They pulled out their swords and daggers and attacked again. Their moves were fiercer than before, and it seemed like they were going to fight to the death. On the first floor, Fengjiu narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman who was standing with her hands on the table. He did not know when the woman had left, and he did not know where she went. Xiao, The sharp sound of the air blade cut through the air, and the man let out a muffled groan. His face darkened as he looked at the arrow stuck in his arm. The arrow seemed to be poisonous, and after he let out a muffled groan, his steps swayed, and his face gradually became ugly. Kill him! The two women shouted and attacked with their swords. However, at this moment, a chopstick shot out from the side room and pierced the hands of the two women who were holding the swords. Ah! The two of them screamed. The daggers and soft swords in their hands fell to the ground. They grabbed their hands and looked at the bloody hole in their palms. Blood flowed out, and their hands trembled in pain. Master, it's here. Hurry! A voice came. The woman who had left came back with a group of 7 or 8 women. The leader was a beautiful woman in her 30s. It's the Hehuan sect. Some of the cultivators on the first floor recognized the woman in the lead. Their faces changed, and they quickly retreated. The women of the Hehuan sect were demonesses who specialized in absorbing the essence of men to cultivate. None of them were good people. No wonder. He knew it. How could a decent woman take off her clothes to face an enemy? It turned out that she was a demoness from the Hehuan sect. No wonder she was so shameless. Who dares to hurt my disciple? The beautiful woman's voice was seductive, but it also contained a ruthless aura. As soon as she entered, her seductive eyes stared at the people on the second floor. However, when she saw that one of them had already stopped breathing, her expression changed even more. How dare you kill my disciple? Today, none of you will leave this place alive. The aura of an expert emanated from the seductive woman. That was the pressure of a celestial sage. As soon as the pressure was released, it enveloped the entire inn, causing the faces of those who were weaker to change drastically. The blood and qi in their bodies started to churn, and they felt an impulse to kneel down. So, it's Li Mei heir from the Hehuan sect. Chapter 1886. Master. The two women retreated at this time, their faces full of grievance and resentment. This person killed Junior's sister, and the one inside injured us. Master, you must seek justice for your disciples. The beautiful woman did not speak, but stared at the side room on the second floor, watching the old man walk out. When the old man's face came into view, the beautiful woman's pupil shrank, and then she smiled charmingly. I was wondering who it was. So it's you, old fart. Although she was smiling, there was no trace of smile in her eyes. On the contrary, the coldness and murderous intent were obvious. It was obvious that the two of them had a grudge to begin with. Fengjiu's gaze fell on the old man who walked out at this time. The old man was dressed in a white robe, his white hair was tied up, and the rest was naturally draped over his back. 2 rows of white eyebrows hung down on his rosy and smooth cheeks, and there was a white beard on his chin. He held a white horsetail whisk in his hand, and he looked like an immortal with a kind and benevolent appearance. At first glance, he looked like an old immortal who had attained the Tao. However, the old man did not speak, but when he did, he was the master of infuriating people to death. When Fengjiu heard this, he was immediately amused. Old witch, you're not dead yet. So how can this old man die? How old are you? You dress up all day and run around with a group of little demonesses. Why don't you take a mirror and look at how thick the layer of powder on your face is? You don't find it disgusting, but this old man feels disgusted for you. When the beautiful woman heard this, she trembled with anger. She glared at the old man and scolded angrily. You old fart. You what? This old man's face is smoother and rosier than yours, even without powder. What? You want to fight? Huh. When you met this old man a few years ago, I already told you, don't fall into my hands next time. Otherwise, I'll skin you alive. As he spoke, The old man tied the horsetail whisk in his hand to his waist and rolled up his sleeves, looking like he was about to fight. "Hunyuanzi, you old fart, today I will tear your mouth apart." Lee Meyer was also angered. She had lived for a long time, and because she was a member of the all-pleasure sect, the thing she hated the most was other people mentioning her age. This damned Hunyuan kept calling her an old witch, and he even said something about the thick powder on her face. She really couldn't take it anymore. She had cultivated for so many years. She didn't believe that she wouldn't be a match for this old man, even if she was already a celestial sage a few years ago. TSK, I was right, wasn't I? Are you feeling guilty? Are you angry? Look at your character. An old witch is an old witch. You won't be able to accomplish anything great. You better be careful. I will destroy your demon sex sooner or later. Seeing that Li Meier's face had turned red from anger, the old man leisurely said. However, his words caused Li Meier's heart to burn with anger. She shouted and pointed her 5 fingers. 5 thin lines shot out from her fingers and attacked the old man standing in front of the door. Step aside. Chapter 1887. However, the man sitting in the corner soon felt that something was wrong. He had taken the antidote, but not only did his body not get better, it seemed to have gotten worse. Especially, his body gradually heated up, his face gradually turned red, and his eyes seemed to become a little blurred. He wasn't someone who hadn't walked outside before. When he saw the condition of his body and saw the seductive and proud smiles of the women downstairs, he knew what was going on. This probably wasn't a poison, but the all-pleasure sex. Feng Zhou was watching the old man and Li Meier fight, so he didn't pay attention to the man sitting in the corner of the second floor. He saw that both of them had the strength of an immortal sage. However, Li Meier was an intermediate immortal sage, while the old man was a peak immortal sage. This way, they could easily suppress Li Meier's attack. The women downstairs also saw that their master was not a match for the old man. They wanted to go up and help, but because the old man was too strong, they were unable to get close to him. Thus, one of them spoke with a flash in her beautiful eyes. "Hunyuanzi, the man behind you can't take it anymore. Do you know what he's been poisoned with? It's not poison, but our all-pleasure sex secret medicine of bliss." Hearing this, Hunyuanzi glared and scolded, "It doesn't matter. If he dies, I'll make sure all of you die with him." The woman choked, and her words were stuck in her mouth. She could only hold her breath and snort heavily, cursing in her heart, "Damned old man. He's really hard to deal with." Feng Zhou watched as Li Meier used her 10 fingers to control the silver threads to attack the old man. When the threads slashed through the roof of the restaurant, they left a mark. She controlled the threads with her 10 fingers. The threads looked sharper than blades. 2 of them directly pierced through the roof of the restaurant. Whoosh! Bang, bang, bang. The old man suddenly pulled out the horsetail whisk from his waist and swung it. A sharp chi blade flew out from the horsetail whisk and attacked Li Meier. Li Meier used the silk thread in her hand to block it. The silk thread in her hand snapped and made a few muffled sounds. However, at the same time that she blocked the airflow, she was about to sneer when she saw the old man's horsetail whisk swinging toward her face. Hiss! The horsetail whisk swung directly at her face, causing her to gasp in pain and scream out loud. Her entire body was also swept downstairs by the force of the blow. "Master." When the women on the first floor saw this, they were shocked. They hurriedly went forward to catch him, but when they saw him, their faces turned pale. They saw that their master's beautiful face was stained with blood, and they could vaguely see the scars left behind by the horsetail whisk. Such a beautiful and dazzling face was actually ruined just like that, causing them to suck in a breath of air one after another. "Let's go." One of them came back to her senses. Seeing that her master was no match for him, she hurriedly supported her and fled. "Master Hunyuan, just you wait. I will definitely kill you." Li Meier's shrill and unresigned voice came from outside and went far into the distance. "Tsk. Damned old witch, I'll let you off easy." Chapter 1888. Did you really get poisoned by the joyful union sex drug of bliss? That's going to be troublesome. The old man helped the man up. He looked at the man's face, which was flushed red. Large beads of sweat were seeping out, and the veins on the back of his hand were faintly visible. He could not help but hesitate for a moment. Carefully, he suggested, "How about this old man find you a brothel?" As soon as he finished speaking, the man fiercely glared and gritted his teeth. "Help me in. Get someone to prepare cold water." Senior Hunyuan. At this time, the people from the other 3 rooms also came out. When they saw that the other party was Hunyuan Zi, they wanted to make friends with him. Therefore, they said, "I'm the patriarch of the Su family in Luo City. This time, a doctor from our family accompanied me on this trip. Why don't we let him take a look at this young friend?" Hunyuan Zi glanced at them and saw that the one who spoke was an old man. Beside him was a middle-aged man who wore a healer's badge on his robe. It was a high-grade badge. Seeing this, he glanced at the man and nodded. "Then I'll have to trouble you." He helped the man into the room, and the people behind him followed. The shopkeeper looked at the restaurant that was almost destroyed and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He went down to clean up. When he reached the first floor, he saw a young man sitting in the corner eating. He saw that the young man didn't seem affected at all. He sat there leisurely eating meat and drinking wine. Even though he had seen many things, he couldn't help but be stunned. This young master? Are you all right?" The shopkeeper asked carefully. He looked at the few plates in front of the young man. Many things had been eaten, leaving only a few bones on the table. Could it be that when those people were fighting, this young man was sitting here eating and watching the show? Thinking of this, the shopkeeper's mouth twitched. There were strange people every year, but there seemed to be more this year. The people who came here today were all abnormal. Burp. Not so good. Feng Jiu burped and shook his head. Not so good. Then where are you hurt? When the shopkeeper heard this, he immediately asked nervously. He didn't want to be injured by the cheese sword or something. If he was injured here, wouldn't he also be unlucky? "No, I'm just a little full. I don't think I can walk anymore." She exhaled softly and rubbed her stomach. She said innocently, "I'm full. I suddenly feel like taking a nap." The shopkeeper looked at the young man in front of him, dumbfounded. Feng Jiu looked at the shopkeeper in front of him and suddenly smiled. He changed the topic. "Shopkeeper, I still have 2 roasted chickens that you haven't sent over yet. Are you guys done burning? How much longer do I have to wait? This place started fighting just now. Maybe it's not done yet. Why don't you wait for a while, young master? I'll go take a look." The shopkeeper asked tentatively. Feng Jiu's eyes narrowed as he smiled and nodded. "All right, when it's done, wrap it up and bring it to me." She stood up, and her dark eyes sneakily landed on the second floor. She wanted to see how the man on the second floor looked like after being poisoned by the drug of bliss. Chapter 1889. At this moment, in the room on the second floor, the old man pulled out the arrow from the man's sleeve. Because the arrow had a hook, there was a piece of flesh. After bandaging the wound, the old man checked the man's pulse. His expression couldn't help but become serious. He took a step back and shook his head. "I'm afraid this old man can't do anything." The man couldn't help but groan. His fists were tightly clenched and blue veins popped out. It was very frightening. Seeing this, Master Hunyuan also frowned. "This can't go on. The cold water is here. The cold water is here." The waiter shouted. He had already prepared a large tub of cold water for them. Seeing this, Master Hunyuan helped the man into the tub of cold water. He saw that the other people were still around. Only then did he notice that in addition to the old men, there were also a few middle-aged men and 2 or 3 young men and women. "You guys go back first. I still have to think of a way," Master Hunyuan said as he stared at the man sitting in the tub with his eyes closed in distress. "Senior Hunyuan, I'm afraid cold water won't be able to cure the poison." They walked and arrived outside the screen. "This all-pleasure sex medicine is extraordinary. If we don't find a way to cure it soon, I'm afraid his meridians will explode and he will die." "A way to cure it? Just find a woman to have sex with?" No. That brat isn't married yet. He also doesn't have anyone he likes. Just randomly finding someone to cure him definitely won't work." As Master Hun Yuan spoke, he frowned. He didn't think that the all-pleasure sex medicine would be so fierce that it would cause someone with such strong self-control to end up like this. While Hun Yuan was talking to them outside the screen, Feng Jiu was blinking her eyes curiously as she looked at the man who was restraining himself. The most direct way to deal with this kind of drug was to go to a brothel and be fine. She didn't expect that this man would rather endure it than deal with it. Looking at him from such a close distance, he felt that this person's face was quite pleasant to look at. His face was upright, and his eyebrows were filled with righteousness. That's right. If he wasn't so righteous, how could he have fallen for the all-pleasure sex woman's plot? Perhaps because Feng Jiu's gaze was too direct, the man suddenly opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he directly bumped into a pair of curious eyes that were sizing him up. Their eyes met. One was puzzled while the other was curious. "Who are you?" The sudden voice startled Master Hun Yuan, who was outside the screen. At some point in time, he was standing by the wooden tub. Wasn't this young man the one who was watching the show from the corner of the first floor? At that time, he was fighting with Li Meier. Everyone on the first floor had left. Even a shopkeeper and the waiter had gone into hiding. Only this brat was still sitting in the corner, eating meat and drinking wine. He was very calm. It was because of this youth's calmness that he took a second look. However, he was too preoccupied with the person who had been drugged to notice this brat. Who would have thought that this brat would sneak in? When did he sneak in? Why didn't he notice? Chapter 1890. Because Zhuijun had been drugged, even though he was soaking in cold water, his body was still burning hot. At this moment, when the young man's fingers touched his wrist, he only felt a chill pass through his fingers, causing him to involuntarily shiver. A wave of comfort spread through his body. But in the next moment, the finger left his wrist. He looked up and met the young man's teasing gaze. His heart skipped a beat, as if he had been seen through. It made him feel ashamed, and he couldn't help but lower his gaze. "How is it? Can you cure it?" Hun Yuan asked when he saw that the youth did not speak for a long time. Perhaps it was because the youth was different from ordinary people, so he had a glimmer of hope in his heart. "Do you have anything valuable?" Feng Jiu looked back at Hun Yuan and asked. Hun Yuan was stunned for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. How can this old man not have anything valuable? He has all the treasures he wants." He turned his gaze and smiled. "So you can cure it?" "Yes." Feng Jiu nodded and extended his hand. He said with a smile, "But I want a reward." That's not a problem. Even if you don't like the old man's collection, this kid is quite rich. He can definitely give you one or two things." Hun Yuan said, then hurriedly said, "Then hurry up. How do you cure it? Hurry up and don't let him suffer alone." "All right. Those who have nothing to do with it, leave." Feng Jiu gestured and glanced at the people at the side. When Hun Yuan heard this, he hurriedly turned around and said to everyone, "Everyone, please leave first. Senior Hun Yuan, I'm afraid this youth doesn't have the ability to cure the drug. In my opinion, it's better to quickly go to the Alchemist Guild to avoid missing the best opportunity," the elder said. The old man said. He felt that it was impossible for this youth to cure the effects of the medicine. After all, he looked so young. Moreover, the medicine of the He Huan sect was not so easy to cure. All right. I know what I'm doing. You guys go out first." Hun Yuan chased them out and locked the door before walking inside. "Take off your shirt." Feng Jiu took out the silver needles and placed them on the table. Zhuijun paused for a moment before taking off his shirt. They were all men, so there was no need to worry about anything. Not to mention just taking off his shirt. Even if he took off his pants, it didn't matter. The most important thing was to get rid of the drug in his body. Feng Jiu pierced the silver needles into Hun Yuan's body. The needles seemed to be placed casually, but each one made Hun Yuan, who was watching from the side, feel his heart skip a beat. This was because if there was any deviation in the placement of each needle, it would really be fatal. "Old man, get someone to bring in some ice and add it to the water." Feng Jiu did not even raise his head as he instructed. His hands were not idle either. Not long after, more than 10 silver needles were inserted into the man's back. Elder Hun Yuan was a little angry when he was called old man by a brat. He thought that he was a well-known figure after all. This brat had eyes but did not recognize Mount Tai. How dare he order him around? How dare he order him around? However, for Joie Jinue's sake, he only took a deep breath, turned around, and walked out. When he arrived outside, he immediately ordered the waiter to bring in a bucket of ice. Chapter 1891. Hey, what's going on? Why did he faint? Han Yuan asked anxiously. Feng Jiu glanced at him and said, "Don't worry, he won't die." She slowly rotated the silver needle, and a trace of spiritual energy entered the man's body through the needle. A light smoke seeped out from the top of his head, and as the smoke seeped out, his originally red face gradually returned to normal. Seeing this scene, Han Yuan exhaled lightly, and his eyes couldn't help but look at Feng Jiu. He thought to himself, this green-robed youth has some skills. Even the old man couldn't cure the poison, but he cured it in a few moves. At the same time, outside, the people from the other families were standing together and talking to each other. I didn't expect to meet Han Yuan of the Nebula Immortal Sect here. If we can get his recommendation, our family's disciples can enter the Nebula Immortal Sect. That would be a great fortune. How could it be that easy? The Nebula Immortal Sect and the other 3 immortal sects are part of the 4 major sects, and their recruitment of disciples is extremely strict. 2 of my family's juniors have been there for 3 consecutive years, but they haven't been able to enter the 4 major sects. Today, we didn't help much, so Han Yuan doesn't have to give us any face. But who is that man? Could he be a descendant of Huan Yuan's family? Doesn't seem like it. And that young man, I don't know where he came from, but I think he caught Master Huan Yuan's eye. Another person said as he glanced at the tightly shut door and sighed. It was rare to meet Han Yuan of the Nebula Immortal Sect. If he could give a recommendation letter or agree to bring 1 or 2 of their juniors into the sect, then their family status would rise. After about an incense stick's worth of time, everyone heard voices coming from the side room. Because the volume was a bit loud, they could hear it clearly from outside, so they looked at each other and listened. In the side room, Feng Jiu looked at the things on the table with a look of disdain. No way. Just these things? It doesn't look like it's worth anything. She picked up a magic tool and looked at it, saying, "You didn't get this from someone else, did you? Look at them. None of them are decent." The things on the table were a little messy. There were daggers inlaid with jewels, some flying magic tools, some defensive magic tools, and some precious treasures. They were all very ordinary and couldn't catch her eye at all. "You don't like these?" The old man stared and raised his eyebrows and picked up a magic tool. "Look at this. I got this from a flying immortal cultivator. It can withstand several attacks from experts. And this is a flying magic tool, so there's no need to mention about its speed. This one's not bad. This is a flying magic tool." Feng Jiu glanced at it and said, "I don't like it. These are all worthless. They don't look good, and they don't have much use. If I wanted these things, I could get more than you. Then tell me, what do you want?" The old man sat down at the table and asked. Chapter 1892. Han Yuanzi snorted. "What do you mean by old and young? Interesting. How rude of you to not know the rules." Although he said that, there was no displeasure on his face. After all, people like him who did not abide by the rules did not value rules very much. He stared at the young man in green in front of him for a while, and a glint flashed across his eyes. "Actually, it's not that I don't have any good treasures, but this old man has to know who the other party is, right?" As he spoke, he took out a teleportation scroll and placed it on the table. "This treasure is rare, even in the 4 major sections." Feng Jiu glanced at it and said disapprovingly, "Isn't it just a teleportation scroll? How rare can it be?" Although he said that, his eyes were still fixed on the item in Han Yuanzi's hand. Just by looking at it, he could feel that it was somewhat different from ordinary teleportation scrolls. "Hee, did I say that you don't know what's good for you?" Han Yuanzi smiled proudly and waved the teleportation scroll in his hand in front of Feng Jiu. Just as he was about to speak, he turned his head slightly and glanced outside. Then, he casually set up a soundproof boundary. Seeing that the old man had set up a soundproof boundary, Feng Jiu was slightly surprised. His originally disapproving expression became serious. "Then tell me, What's so rare about this thing? The people outside were listening attentively, but they did not hear clearly what treasure it was. Suddenly, they could not hear anything. Everyone present was smart and naturally guessed that the person inside had set up a soundproof boundary to prevent them from hearing their conversation. Thinking of this, their expressions changed slightly. What kind of treasure could make Hunyuanzi take it out and set up a soundproof boundary? He said that it was rare even in the 4 major sections. It seemed that it was really a big treasure. The more they wanted to know, the more they could not find out. This made their hearts itch, and they felt like they were going crazy from not getting what they wanted. Inside the room, look, Hunyuanzi opened the teleportation scroll in his hand. When the teleportation scroll was opened, specks of light floated from the scroll. The scroll was not an ordinary teleportation scroll talisman, but something like a map. Moreover, the names on it faintly floated as if they were flying in front of them. Fengjiu looked at the teleportation scroll curiously. This was the first time he had seen such a thing. He couldn't help but reach out his hand. Let me see. Just as he was about to take it, the old man patted his hand. Go, go, go. The old man put it away like a treasure and stared at Fengjiu with a sneaky smile. What do you think? Not bad, right? Was it a treasure? Let me tell you. The special thing about this teleportation scroll is that as long as it's a place that's drawn on it, you'll be able to teleport through tens of thousands of kilometers of space with just a thought. Fengjiu's pupils constricted, and his face was full of surprise. So powerful? Of course. Otherwise, how could it be called a treasure? Hunyuan said proudly. Hearing this, Fengjiu looked at him strangely and said, Since it's such a precious thing, why are you willing to take it out? Could it be that you have other intentions? Ha! The old man raised his head and laughed loudly. His face was full of joy. Not bad, not bad. Didn't this old man just say it? Even if you want to give something, you have to know who is giving it to you, right? However, just as she finished speaking, a ray of light suddenly enveloped her. In an instant, her entire body became blurry, and she turned into a beam of light that shot into the sky with a whoosh. You stinking brat. Chapter 1894. He sat on the ground in a daze with a dumbfounded expression. He couldn't understand why a smart person like him would fall for that brat's trick. The people outside the room were also stunned because they saw a dazzling light suddenly burst out from the room. That light directly soared into the sky. When they looked through the window on the 2nd floor, they saw that light streaking across the sky and landing in a distant place. What is that? One of them asked in a daze. An old man was startled and said, It seems like something flew out. Should we go into the room to take a look? A middle-aged man asked. I don't think it's appropriate. Something doesn't seem right. The old man said as he stared at the silent room, wondering if something had happened inside. Inside the room, Hunyuanzi had a sullen expression as he muttered something under his breath. He stood up, still fuming with anger. Although Fengjiu had helped that brat cure the effects of the pill of bliss, and he had promised to give him something as a reward, when he thought about how his treasure had been cheated away just like that, and that brat hadn't even taken him as a disciple, he couldn't help but feel a little angry. He went inside and saw that the person sleeping on the bed hadn't woken up yet. He glared at him and sat down by the bed. He took out a small bottle of medicine from his pocket and opened it. He put it under his nose. A pungent smell came out, and the unconscious person frowned and slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the angry Hunyuanzi sitting by the bed and didn't see the youth who helped him cure the effects of the extreme happiness. He asked, Where's that youth? That brat ran away. He swindled my extreme light teleportation scroll away. When the old man said this, he couldn't help but feel wronged. He finally took a liking to someone, but he actually lied to him. It was fine if he lied to him, but he even swindled his treasure. He was already so old. Was it easy? Zhuo Junyue was startled and asked, What happened? The youth didn't look like an evil person, nor did he look like someone who would lie. Didn't he say that he would be rewarded after he cured you? The old man took out a lot of things, but he didn't like them. Later, I took out the Aurora transmission scroll and showed it to him. I also told him that there were a lot of benefits if he worships the old man as his master. Who knew that kid? Thinking about how that rascal had disappeared with his Aurora transportation scroll, he was furious. That rascal was talking about Fu Guang City. I must find him. I don't believe that I can't find him. Zhuo Junyue was silent. It turned out that he had taken the item out to show off. This was normal. The young man had asked for a reward first before taking the item away. It wasn't a scam. He deserved it. He knew that if he hadn't helped him get rid of the poison in his body, he wouldn't know what would have happened to him. Looking at Han Yuanzi's angry face, Zhuo asked, "Are you sad that he took that thing away? Or are you sad that he didn't acknowledge you as his master?" Han Yuanzi was taken aback. He snorted heavily and said, "Both." Chapter 1895. Han Yuanzi glared at him. "How was this old man not behaving like a teacher? Don't talk nonsense. You should know that if this old man didn't contribute the Aurora transfer scroll, you would still be in deep trouble." Zhuo Junyue, who was walking out, suddenly stopped and turned back to look at Han Yuanzi. "What did you say that young man was called?" Han Yuanzi was startled by his sudden stop. After steadying himself, he said, "That stinking brat is called Fengjio. If you see him in the future, remember to catch him for this old man." When the two went out, the dozen or so people in front of them greeted them with surprise. Each and every one of them looked at Zhuo Junyue and from time to time looked behind the two, try to find the figure of the azure-robed young man. However, at this time, the shopkeeper came up, followed by a waiter carrying something in his hand. "Sir, take a look at this compensation," the shopkeeper said carefully. When Han Yuanzi heard this, he wanted to curse a few times, but when he saw the mess of the restaurant, he pointed to Zhuo Junyue and said, "Go find him. He has money." "Sir." Before he could finish, Zhuo Junyue took out a small bag of gold coins and handed it to him. The shopkeeper took the gold coins and smiled, asking, "What about that azure-robed young man?" The 2 roasted chickens he asked for are already ready. When Han Yuanzi heard this, his eyebrows rose and his eyes widened. He snatched the roasted chicken from the waiter's hand. "Just give it to me." The dozen or so people wanted to ask, but looking at the situation, they didn't ask anymore. Just as they were thinking of getting closer, they saw Han Yuanzi angrily walk out, followed by the man. On the other side, outside of Floating Cloud City, Fengjio suddenly appeared. Her whole body spun a few times on the ground before she was able to stabilize her footing. After standing firm, she let out a sigh of relief and looked down at the transmission scroll in her hand. She couldn't help smiling. TSK, what a treasure. She held the teleportation scroll and looked at it carefully. When she saw the names of the places floating on it, she couldn't help but grin. However, all of a sudden, she felt a pair of eyes on her. Thus, she raised her head and looked at them. Following their gazes, she noticed that there were 2 middle-aged men staring at her. To be precise, they were staring at the Aurora teleportation scroll in her hand. Seeing this, she rolled up the Aurora transportation scroll in her hand and kept it in her space. Then, she looked at the city gate master. When she saw the words Fu Guang City, she couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect to arrive here so quickly. He just didn't know if the others would be able to reach the place they had agreed to meet in 3 days. She straightened her robes and walked towards the city gate with a natural expression. Even so, she still attracted the attention of some people. After all, she was outside the city gate, and her sudden appearance would naturally attract some attention. As a matter of fact, before he even reached the city gate, he was already stopped by someone. This little brother, a middle-aged man, called out, his gaze falling on Fengjio. Fengjio ignored him and continued walking towards the city gate. However, just as she was about to pass through the city gate, the person who had called out to her caught up with her and blocked her way. This little brother, the middle-aged man, stood in front of Fengjio with a smile. Chapter 1896. Haha, little brother, are you from out of town? Do you want to enter the city? I wonder if it's convenient for us to speak a few words. The middle-aged man asked as he looked at the azure-robed youth in front of him. It's not convenient, I'm busy, Fengjio said as she walked past him. The middle-aged man didn't stop her and just stared at Fengjio, who was walking inside, before continuing to walk forward. After entering the city, Fengjio didn't stop. The place she had agreed to meet with them wasn't Floating Cloud City, but a town below it. From here, it wouldn't take more than half a day to reach. She just didn't know if the others had arrived or not. After entering the city, she continued to walk through the streets, squeezing through the crowds. She didn't need to turn her head to feel that someone was following her, one in the light, one in the dark. The corners of her lips curled up slightly, revealing a smile. Along the way, when she passed by a wine shop, she took out a wine gourd from her space and filled it with wine. She drank as she walked, leisurely and contented. The two people following her had been paying attention to the azure-robed figure in front of them. The scene outside the city gate, others didn't notice, but they did. The youth had suddenly appeared using a transmission scroll, but ordinary transmission scrolls didn't have that kind of light. It was clear that the thing he had was extraordinary. However, even though he had a treasure, this youth's strength was only at the peak of Foundation establishment. Such a person didn't need to talk about stealing his treasure. Even if they wanted to take his life, it would be easy. In particular, this youth didn't have the slightest bit of vigilance. They had been following behind him all the way, but he didn't even turn his head to pay attention. It was clear that if he had such a treasure, even if they didn't steal it, it would have been taken away by someone else. On the mountain road, under a tree, Fengjiu was drinking wine and humming a tune. She leaned against the tree and rested with her eyes half closed, giving the people following her an opportunity. She held the wine in her arms and narrowed her eyes, looking as if she had fallen asleep. At this time, not far away, two people came out from behind. The two people looked at each other and saw the greed in each other's eyes. "That thing is mine. I advise you to leave," a middle-aged man said as he stared at the other man. The two of them were equally matched in strength. If they really fought over it, it was hard to say who would get the item. The other person sneered, "You?" As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly rushed forward and attacked the green-clothed youth under the tree in front of him at an extremely fast speed. The item was with that young man. As long as he got it, he didn't believe that person would be able to catch up to him. When the other person saw this, he cursed and also rushed forward. His target was the young man under the tree. But who knew that just as the two of them were about to reach out to attack, the youth who had his eyes closed as if he was drunk suddenly opened his eyes. He even grinned at them, giving the two of them fright. By the time they wanted to pull back, it was already too late. The young man suddenly reached out and grabbed their feet, pulling them down and lifting them up at the same time. He pulled out their belts and tied their feet together, hanging them upside down on the tree. Chapter 1897. What shocked the two of them the most was that the young man was smiling at them with his eyes narrowed. He was holding 2 silver needles in his hand. Looking at the cold light on the 2 silver needles, the two of them couldn't help but shiver. "Little brother, what are you trying to do?" One of the middle-aged men said as he looked at the young man with an evil smile. His scalp went numb. Fengjiu played with the 2 silver needles in his hand and smiled at the two men. "I see that you're tired from following me all the way here, so I'll let them rest on the tree." As he spoke, he pierced the 2 silver needles into their acupuncture points. The two men gasped and felt their bodies suddenly go limp. Following that, their spiritual energy disappeared without a trace. When they could no longer feel the spiritual energy in their bodies, their faces turned pale. "How can this be? What did you do to us?" Fengjiu pulled out the silver needles and smiled. "No need to thank me. I'm just teaching you a lesson." She took the Qinquan bags from their bodies and kept them in her space. She clapped her hands. "All right, you can hang here." Seeing the young man turn and leave, the two men hurriedly shouted, Don't go. Don't go. What's with our spiritual energy? What did you do to us? Come back, come back." As the voices behind him shouted, Fengjiu waved his hand and soon disappeared on the path. Until evening, she finally arrived at the place where she had agreed to meet Lei Xiao and the rest. Once she entered the small forest, she felt that someone was watching her from the shadows. As she walked forward, she heard surprised voices. "Leader! It's Leader! Leader is here!" A series of surprised voices sounded. Following that, people in black appeared one after another in the forest. When they saw the young man in green, their eyes were filled with joy. "Leader, it's good that you're back safely. We were worried that you might be trapped," a man in black said. It's just that we were delayed by some matters on the way here. All right, is everyone here? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. The number of people didn't seem right. There's still one team that hasn't arrived, but they'll only arrive tomorrow. It should be fine. Lei Xiao walked out and said, "That's good." She nodded and followed them to the small forest to sit down. She asked, "Did they all arrive today?" "Yes, we also just arrived," Susan said. At this time, everyone took off their masks, revealing their original faces. She thought for a moment and said, "How about this? Tell a few of them to follow me into the city to buy some daily necessities. We have to change out of the black clothes that have the mark of the Temple of Darkness on them." "All right, then I'll bring a few brothers with me," Susan said. Just as he was about to speak, one of them stepped forward and said, "I want to go too." A black-clothed man walked forward. Feng Jiu saw that it was the bearded man. However, his beard had been shaved, and he appeared to be in high spirits. "All right, let's go. The rest of you wait here. Also, tear off the mark of your black clothes to prevent others from recognizing you." She pointed to the badges on their arms that were printed on their clothes. Thus, a few of them tore off the mark of their badges and burned them. Then, they followed Feng Jiu into the city. Chapter 1898. As that person spoke, he moved closer to Feng Jiu and sniffed, but before he could get close, Feng Jiu ordered him to retreat. "Stand still." Feng Jiu glanced at him and said, "What do you think you look like? Once we enter the city, we can have as much wine as we want. Do you think we can forget about you?" That's true." He smiled embarrassedly and rubbed his head. Thinking that he was finally free after being locked up for so many months, his mood was unusually good. They chatted and laughed along the way. After entering the city, they all followed Feng Jiu's side in an orderly manner. They bought almost all the suitable clothes in the city's clothing stores and ordered 2 roast pigs and some spiced beef from the restaurant. Then they went to the wine shop and bought more than 10 large jars of wine. They put everything into everyone's Cosmos bags and walked around the city before going back to the restaurant to get the roast pigs. As the sky gradually darkened, several bonfires were lit in the small forest. Everyone sat around them and chatted until they saw Feng Jiu and the others return. They quickly went up to greet them. "Captain, you're back." "We're back. We bought everything. Everyone, take out the food and eat together," Feng Jiu said, and let them take out the things in their Cosmos bags. Seeing the wine and meat, everyone laughed. One of them said, "I knew we'd have to drink later. Look, these freshly cut bamboo tubes come in handy." As they spoke, everyone smiled and took out the bamboo tubes they had previously cut. Some set up the roast pigs, some helped everyone get the wine, and some shared the spiced beef. "Captain, when everyone is here, what should we do next?" Someone asked. "When everyone is here, I don't know about anything else, but how about we take down the trove of Treasures Pavilion first?" Feng Jiu smiled and looked at everyone, saying, "That's where the Temple of Darkness amasses their wealth. There should be a lot of treasures there." And back then, she had been captured by the people there and sent to the training camp. No matter what, she had to go back and greet them. Otherwise, it would be too unkind. "All right, we'll listen to Captain," everyone said in a clear voice. As the night gradually darkened, Feng Jiu found a tree to rest in. The others sat around and chatted. Some walked around and paid attention to the surroundings. The night was relatively peaceful until the sky gradually darkened. When it was close to midnight, a few women's cries for help suddenly rang out in the night. "Ah, help! Help!" That voice didn't sound far, as if it was not far from the forest. Thus, Feng Jiu jumped down and led a dozen people and followed the voice. "What are you shouting for? Everyone here are our people. Even if you shout, no one will come." "That's right. Looking at you guys, you should know that female rogue cultivators have to rely on powerful male cultivators to survive. Otherwise, they could meet with misfortune at any time. However, it's different if you follow us. We're fairy realm cultivators, and we're much stronger than you guys." The 2 people who spoke were the 2 fairy realm cultivators under Feng Jiu. Because they were drunk, their eyes were blurred and filled with lust. They hugged the 2 female loose cultivators and moved their hands up and down. At the same time, they moved forward to kiss the woman's red lips. Chapter 1899. Don't. The female cultivator cried out in alarm, her face pale with fright. Female cultivators were most afraid of encountering such a situation. Because of this, when they walked outside, they would try not to sleep outside. But tonight, when they arrived at Floating Cloud City, the city gates were already closed and they couldn't enter, so they decided to spend the night in this small forest. Who would have thought that they would run into these two drunkards who came out of nowhere, their bodies reeking of alcohol? Moreover, what made them despair the most was that these two cultivators had the strength of the fairy realm. These two gold core cultivators had no power to resist at all. Could it be that tonight they would really be defiled by these two people? Unwilling to give up, the two of them bit down on each other's hands as their hands were being captured. Stinky woman. One of the fairy realm cultivators cried out in pain, and at the same time, he slapped her. "Pa, you dare to bite me. I'll kill you." Immediately after, a flurry of punches and kicks followed. Fengjiu and the others were standing not far away and saw this scene. They also clearly heard the words of the two people. She stared at the two people with a frosty expression. Lei Xiao and Su San saw this, and saw Fengjiu's cold expression. So they quickly shouted to the shocked people behind them, "Why haven't you come forward and detained these two people?" "Oh, yes." The dozen or so people behind them suddenly came back to their senses. As they quickly stepped forward, they secretly glanced at Fengjiu, who was dressed in black, and quickly stepped forward, holding the two people's hands behind their backs and forcing them to kneel on the ground. Who dares to touch me?" The two people cursed, then suddenly raised their heads. When they recognized their brothers, they were startled, but then they smiled and said, "So it's you? Why are you also here? Quickly let us go. There are two female loose cultivators over there. It's a good opportunity to reward our brothers." When the people holding the two people heard this, their faces darkened. Originally, they didn't use much strength, but when they heard this, they increased their strength and said, "Shut up. Don't talk nonsense." At this moment, they didn't even dare to raise their heads to look at their captain. They didn't even need to look to know how ugly their captain's expression was. The two female cultivators fell to the ground. Seeing the two people being restrained by the masked men, their eyes were still filled with shock. They looked at the green-clothed youth standing there with a frosty expression, and their hearts inexplicably settled. Perhaps feeling that the atmosphere was not right, the two of them looked back. When they saw the green figure standing not far away, they laughed and said, "So it's Captain. Captain is also here. Could it be that you've also taken a fancy to those two beauties?" "Take him back." Fengjiu did not walk over. Instead, he turned around and walked back. They escorted the two men back and brought the two women to the bonfire. When they arrived at the bonfire, the two women were startled when they saw the masked men around the bonfire. There were actually so many black-clothed men here. Could he be from some organization? They tried to distinguish their origins from their clothes, but they saw that their sleeves were torn, so they couldn't tell where they came from. "Captain, what's going on?" Chapter 1900. What are you doing?" The two of them roared angrily and glared fiercely at Fengjiu, who was standing in front of them with a cold expression. "Who do you think you are? What right do you have to treat us like this?" Fengjiu looked at them coldly, but did not speak to them. Instead, she looked at the crowd around her and said, "Back then, I gave you a chance to leave, but you chose to stay. I also told you about my rules. If you break my rules, I will not let you off easily." Her voice was neither fast nor slow. However, when the crowd heard her, they felt a cold aura sweep across their hearts. The murderous intent that could not be ignored was also clear, causing them to tremble in fear. "Leader, we will never dare to forget your words. From the moment we decided to follow you, we are your people." The crowd's voices were clear and solemn. At this moment, the two people who were forced to kneel on the ground were slightly startled, as if they had thought of something. They lowered their heads for a moment, but in the next moment, they raised their heads again, their eyes filled with hatred. "We said that we would follow you. So what? You're just toying with two women. Is it that serious? You're the weakest among us. You're only at the peak of the nascent soul stage. What right do you have to control us, fairy realm powerhouses? When the crowd heard this, they frowned under their masks. Are these two people trying to court death? Let them go, Feng said to the cultivators who were holding the two people captive. As soon as she finished speaking, the cultivators who were holding the two people released their hands and retreated to the side. When the two people regained their freedom and stood up, they saw a green figure flashing in front of them and waving a fist towards them. The two of them looked at each other and gritted their teeth. They wanted to teach him a lesson so that he would not think that they, as fairy realm powerhouses, had to listen to him. However, even if the two of them joined forces, their speed and strength were too weak. They cannot be compared to Feng at all. When she waved her fist, it hit one of the fairy realm powerhouses. Bang! Crack! A heavy punch landed, and the sound of his sternum breaking could be heard. The fairy realm cultivator cried out in pain, and his entire body bent over. When he spat out a mouthful of blood, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Whoosh! Bang! Crack! Feng raised her foot and kicked the other man's leg. That man gasped and fell to his knees. Feng raised her foot and kicked, breaking the other man's leg. Everyone's eyes flickered as they watched. They already knew that their captain was very powerful. This time, when they saw him fight, the speed and strength of his attacks made them very suspicious. Was he really just a nascent soul cultivator? That day, they had left early and did not see the battle between him and the people from the Temple of Darkness. All this time, they had not been able to figure out his cultivation level, but they were sure that his strength was definitely not at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Bang! The two figures were kicked high into the air. After hitting the branches above, they fell heavily to the ground. They lay on the ground and groaned, unable to get up for a long time. Chapter 1901. Are cultivators of the fairy realm considered powerful? Feng looked at the two men lying on the ground and asked, "You're already so proud with your current strength? Are you allowed to do evil now? Are you allowed to be arrogant now?" She interrogated them again and again, causing the two men to be speechless. She did not know if they were speechless from shame or because they were beaten to the point that they could not speak. They only knew that they were lying on the ground with their heads lowered, their bodies twitching slightly. Feng stared at the two men, then looked away indifferently. His voice was cold as he said, "Lei Xiao, kill them." When he said this, the two men on the ground were finally shocked. They raised their heads abruptly, their eyes filled with panic. At this moment, they knew that their captain was serious. "Captain, no. Captain, don't kill us." That when Lei Xiao heard Feng words, he did not hesitate at all. He strode forward to the two men and grabbed their throats with one hand and supported their heads with the other. In the next moment, he twisted his hand forcefully. Crack! With a crack, the man did not even have the chance to scream before he died. The other man was the same. He did not even have time to beg for mercy before he died in Lei Xiao's hands. When the surrounding people saw this scene, they were all silent. They felt that it was only natural. At the same time, they were alarmed. The fate of these two men would always remind them of the consequences of breaking the rules. Feng turned around and looked at the crowd. "I hope that all of you will remember what happened today and remember what you should not do. If you break my rules, you will be punished no matter how far away you are. Yes, Captain, don't worry. We will not let you down," the crowd said in unison. Feng nodded and looked at the two women beside him. He then said, "You can rest here for the night and leave tomorrow morning." "Thank you, young master." The two women bowed. They did not dare to be disrespectful to this young man in green. Paisen led his men to bury the two men. That night, after such a thing happened, no one could sleep. When the sky brightened, the city gates opened. The two women expressed their thanks and left. Feng and the others were still waiting in the forest for the last group to return. However, when the sun rose, what they were waiting for was not the group of 20 people, but a heavily injured cultivator covered in blood. When the people outside the forest saw the man, they quickly helped him into the forest and asked, "Why are you the only one here? What about the others? Did something happen? Where's the captain? Quick, quick, take me to see the captain." The man panted as he spoke, one hand covering the wound on his abdomen that was still bleeding. Two men in black helped him in and came to Fengjiu. "Captain, something happened. Look." Fengjiu quickly walked in front of that person. Seeing that he was seriously injured, he couldn't help but frown and ask, "What happened? Who hurt you?" Captain, our team was ambushed yesterday. A team of people was trapped in that damned forest. Furthermore, there were demonic cultivators inside. My brothers risked their lives so that I could escape and report the news. Captain, please, quickly go and save them." After saying this, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Chapter 1902. Ghost Forest. Fengjiu softly muttered the name when he heard a voice from the side. "Captain, I know that place," Su San said, then looked at Fengjiu and said, "The Ghost Forest isn't far from here. It's a forest north of Floating Cloud City. It's gloomy all year round and is said to be one of the nests of devil cultivators. Most importantly, there's a spirit array in that place. Even people who have a little understanding of spirit arrays will be trapped inside. Leave 2 people behind to take care of him," Fengjiu said, then looked at the person bandaging his wounds under a tree, then said to Su San, "Since you know that place, you take them there. Don't enter the forest, just wait outside for my orders. I'll go and see what's going on first." "Captain wants to go alone? How can that be?" Several of them said in unison. "No matter what, you should at least take a few people with you. It's too dangerous to go alone. They can injure a flying immortal realm cultivator like this. It can be seen that the strength of those devil cultivators isn't low. It's too dangerous to go alone. If you fall into their hands, I'm afraid. I have my own plans. You don't have to worry." After saying that, she gave him a few more instructions, then took out the Aurora transmission scroll. Seeing that the ghost forest was also on it, she poured her spiritual chi into it. Then it turned into a ray of light and streaked across the sky. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw this scene. What kind of treasure was that? How could it disappear in an instant? That wasn't an ordinary transmission scroll, right? They didn't think too much about it and quickly got ready to set off. "You 2 stay behind to take care of him and wait for us to come back," Su San said to the 2 people who were bandaging the injured man. "Okay, then you 2 be careful and go quickly. Don't let Captain wait for too long." The 2 said, "Understood," Su San replied, then looked at Lei Xiao. After the 2 nodded, they quickly led their people away on their flying swords. On the other side, in the ghost forest north of Floating Cloud City, Fengjiu suddenly appeared in the forest. As soon as he appeared, he felt a gloomy aura and a faint smell of blood permeating the air. From the faint smell of blood, he could tell that many people had died in this forest. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't come to a place like this. The only ones who could stand in this place were probably those evil things and devil cultivators. She didn't know where to start in such a large forest. Thus, she stood there quietly and closed her eyes. At the same time, she released her divine sense. After a while, she found the location of number 1 and the others. She took a deep breath and walked towards that place. After walking for a while, she saw that the surrounding trees began to move. One by one, they moved, making it difficult for her to tell the direction. Petty tricks. Fengjiu snorted and waved his hand. A flame shot out and turned into a fire snake that coiled around the trees. The flame burned along the tree trunks. Not long after, the moving things were burned to ashes. Chapter 1903. I'm afraid we can't get out. Those demonic cultivators are deliberately trying to exhaust us to death. They don't even need to do anything here. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for us to survive. A man in black said as he sat up and looked at the endless desert in front of him. He sighed softly. I didn't expect this illusion array to be so powerful. This is the first time I've encountered such an illusion array. I'm afraid that even the captain can't enter this place and save us. Hearing this, number 1 stood up and said to everyone, "We can't just sit here and wait for death. We've rested for a while. Everyone get up. We'll definitely find where the life gate is." But none of us are proficient in formations. Have you forgotten that we accidentally barged into a few death gates and got ourselves injured? We almost died here. Furthermore, the direction in here keeps changing. We originally had no way to find it. So what? It's better than waiting for death here, right? Hearing this, everyone fell silent for a moment. Then one by one they stood up. All right, let's search. Even if we die from an attack, it's better than waiting for death here. Thus, everyone once again searched for the life gate. They walked in this illusion array and groped around. Every step they took was very careful. The scenery in front of them also changed according to the changes in the illusion array. The wind and sand flew, and the sun shone brightly, making it difficult for them to move. Look, there's a rock over there. A man in black said as he pointed at a large rock not far away. In this illusion array, anything could be the key to breaking the illusion array. Let's go take a look. As everyone spoke, they quickly walked forward. When they arrived, they surrounded the rock and looked at it. Then they discussed, let's move it and take a look. If it's not the life gate, I'm afraid it'll be dangerous again. All right, let's move it. As everyone spoke, one of them went forward to move the rock. The moment the rock moved, a dark and eerie hole suddenly appeared under their feet. The people standing there were caught off guard and fell into it. When number one saw the sharp blades pointing upwards, he couldn't help but be shocked. He quickly took out a magic tool and threw it downwards. Just as the magic tool became bigger, the people above also fell down one after another. They all fell onto the magic tool. Everyone cried out in alarm and came back to their senses. A sense of lingering fear emerged in their hearts. We really made a trip to the gates of death. If it wasn't for number one's magic tool, I'm afraid we would have all been turned into hedgehogs. However, at this moment, the sound of a metal object colliding was heard. Everyone raised their heads to look and saw that the cave entrance was covered by a black iron cover. At the same time, loud laughter was heard. Look, these bastards jumped in a hole one by one. Didn't I tell you? We don't even need to do anything to deal with them. Ah, that's right. However, these people have fallen into our hands. No matter what, we have to play with them. How do you want to play? More than 10 demonic cultivators surrounded them and stared at the people in the hole. They laughed sinisterly and proudly. Why don't we pour some oil on them and burn them to death? Or would it be better to pour some water down here and watch them drown? When number one heard this, he looked around and said, I'll go up on my flying magic tool. You guys try to cut open that black iron cover or push it away. Chapter 1904. Ha ha ha. You want to come up? Let's see if you have the ability. Laughter could be heard from above. Then, some oil was poured into the cave. The oil splashed down and landed on their bodies. It was a little pungent. Then a few balls of fire flew in. Without needing to speak, the people inside worked together to extinguish the flames. However, no matter how fast they extinguished the flames, there were still tongues of fire that reached the oil. In an instant, the oil was set ablaze. One of them was on fire. The scorching heat made him cry out in surprise. The people beside him quickly shouted, Take off your clothes. Seeing the people below on fire, the devil cultivators above laughed loudly. Look at them. How interesting. Just as they finished laughing, a cold voice suddenly came from behind them. Is it very interesting? Why don't you go down and try? When the voice suddenly came out, the devil cultivators above were shocked. They quickly turned around and saw a green figure rushing up. Before they could even see his face clearly, one of them had a cut on his throat. Blood spurted out, and he fell to the ground, twitching. Damn it, where did this brat come from? Kill him. Another person cursed angrily and attacked with his sword. However, before he could get close, he was sent flying with a kick. Feng Jiao took out her Qing Feng sword when she saw the iron barrier that covered the entrance of the cave. A sharp sword Qi shot out with a swish, and a green streak of light flew out. With a swish, the iron barrier was sliced into two. She walked forward and saw that the people below were looking up. When they saw that it was her, their faces were filled with surprise. Captain, at this moment, everyone's hearts were filled with excitement. They had never thought that their captain would come so quickly. Moreover, it was when their lives were hanging by a thread. Their hearts, which had originally given up all hope, could not help but be pleasantly surprised, excited, and shocked when they saw that handsome face. "Come up quickly." As Fengjiu spoke, she turned around and glanced at the devil cultivators holding long swords. She saw that they were also at the fairy realm. The only difference was that there were more devil cultivators who were at their peak. Furthermore, to be able to set up such an exquisite formation in this forest, it seemed that there were people who were extremely proficient in formations. The ancient divine sword, Qing Feng's sword, the devil cultivators were also knowledgeable. At this moment, they saw that the black iron shield was easily cut open by the sword in the green-robed youth's hand. They also saw that the sword was emitting a green light. How could they not know that it was the ancient divine sword, Qing Feng's sword? "Kill him. Take his life and hand it over to the demon's supremacy. We will definitely reward you." One of them shouted. His eyes were filled with greed. Such an ancient divine sword should fall into their hands. He believed that as long as they handed over this sword, they would definitely receive great benefits. "You want my Qing Feng sword? That will depend on your abilities." Fengjiu's lips curled into a cold smile. She turned the Qing Feng sword in her hand, and green sword flowers shot out towards the devil cultivators. The green sword flowers were like green bamboo leaves at this moment, sharp and terrifying. Every sword flower carried the power of a peak fairy sage and killing intent. They were as fast as the speed of light. "Ah, hiss! Damn it! He's actually a fairy sage expert." Chapter 1905. The demon cultivators who were trying to escape felt as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on their heads, causing them to be unable to breathe properly. Their blood and qi surged within their bodies. Then, their legs gave way, and they fell to the ground, unable to stand up. They groaned and tried to break free from the pressure and stand up. However, before the pressure from the peak of the celestial sage realm could be lifted, they felt as if they were being pressed down by an invisible mountain, unable to move. When number one and the others escaped from below, they saw that the dozen or so devil cultivators had all fallen to the ground. Moreover, there was a powerful airflow surging in the air. None of them could stand up, and some of them even spat out blood. Immediately after, they saw the green sword in the captain's hand turn, and a cold light shot out. With a swoosh, those people were cut in half. Mournful screams rang out in the forest, as if they had broken through the sky. They were extremely sharp and ear-piercing. As more than a dozen people died, the smell of blood in the air became extremely thick, causing people to have a nauseating feeling. When number one and the rest saw this scene, they were shocked. Their hearts skipped a beat as they looked at the young man who was standing at the side with a calm expression. They could only feel a wave of shock in their hearts. Although they knew that their captain was extremely outstanding, it was only at this moment that they found out that he was actually at the peak of the celestial saint realm. Moreover, he even had the ancient divine sword, Qing Feng, in his hand, which allowed him to easily kill more than a dozen fairy realm experts. Such shocking power and such clean and efficient methods really shocked them. Take their things and look through them. See if there are any books on formations among them, Fengjiu said as he looked at the group of people who were in a sorry state. Yes, everyone came back to their senses and hurriedly went forward to take the cosmos bags and interspatial rings from the devil cultivators. They rummaged through them and finally found a worn-out ancient book on formations in one of the devil cultivators' interspatial rings. "Captain, there really is one." One of the black-robed men handed the ancient book on formations to Fengjiu. Fengjiu glanced at it and took it. Then he said to them, "You can divide the other things among yourselves. Also, treat your wounds and follow me out." "Yes, thank you, Captain." Everyone agreed and thanked him happily. After all, these demonic cultivators had a lot of things on them. After their wounds were bandaged, Fengjiu passed them some water and let them drink a few mouthfuls before leading them out of the forest. Following behind Fengjiu, everyone's gazes were filled with curiosity. They watched as their captain casually walked through the formations like it was his own backyard. He easily avoided the formations and led them out of the forest. They couldn't help but feel curious. What was the origin of the captain? Did he sneak into the Temple of Darkness himself? With such strength and ability, it could be seen that his background was definitely not low. Lei Xiao, Su San, and the others hurriedly arrived outside the ghost forest. They kept looking around, wondering if they should go in and take a look. Then they saw familiar figures walking out. "Look, they're out!" Someone shouted in surprise. Chapter 1906. "I'm fine," Feng Jiu said and looked at number 1 and the others. "Give them something to eat." "Okay." Lei Xiao and the others responded and handed them water and meat. "Eat some to replenish your strength." "How are your injuries? Do you need to bandage them again?" "No need, they're just minor injuries." They shook their heads and took the water and meat to eat. "Captain, is number 37 okay?" Number 1 asked. He was asking about the person who escaped to ask for help. "He's seriously injured and ran back to report. He fainted after saying that. But don't worry, 2 people stayed behind to take care of him," Feng Jiu said and sat down. He took out the ancient book on formations and flipped through it. He roughly looked at the formations in it and put it away. He was going to give his book to Du Fan and let him study it. He believed that it could improve his formation skills again. After the group rested for a while, they went back again. About 2 hours later, they returned to the small forest and met up with the other 3. After everyone had arrived, Feng Jiu changed the injured people into normal clothes and asked them to go to the Trove of Treasures building to find a courtyard to stay in and heal their injuries first. The other team went directly to the Trove of Treasures building to inquire about the good news and wait for orders before taking action. She used the Aurora transportation scroll to go back to Elder Tan's place to take a look. Therefore, in the evening, when the sky was getting dark, Feng Jiu entered the town and went to the market. She bought 2 caddies of spiced beef and a jar of wine and went to Elder Tan's courtyard. When she arrived at the courtyard, there was no one inside. Therefore, she put the things on the table and found 2 wine bowls. When she was done, she saw Elder Tan push the door open and come in. When he saw Feng Jiu sitting in the courtyard, he was stunned. "Grandpa Tan, you're here? I bought spiced beef and wine. Come and try it." Feng Jiu smiled and sat down at the table. At the same time, she poured wine into the wine bowl. Elder Tan, who came back to his senses, was stunned. He put down the things and walked forward. After sitting down at the table, he stared at Feng Jiu. "You're okay? How did you get out?" He could still get out after entering that place? It was not simple. "I already said that I'll be fine." Feng Jiu squinted her eyes and said, "I left after I was done there. By the way, I brought out all the people who were caught with me and destroyed their territory." Elder Tan was speechless when he heard this. He stared at him speechlessly. "Come, let's not talk about that. Try this wine." She gestured and took a sip. Elder Tan calmed down and picked up his wine to suppress his shock. Regardless of whether it was true or not, to be able to sit here and say these words, it seemed that there should be some truth to it. However, this side had not received such news yet. The people from the Endless Treasures Pavilion probably didn't know about it yet, right? Since you left, why did you still come back here? What else do you want to do? He couldn't be thinking of making a move against the Endless Treasures Pavilion, right? When this thought appeared, Elder Tan was shocked. Hee, didn't I want to come back to see you so that you won't keep worrying? Besides, I still have some things to deal with here, so I came back. After I'm done, I'll be leaving. I don't think we'll have a chance to see each other again. Chapter 1907. Elder Tan drank another mouthful of wine to suppress his shock as he sized up the youth in front of him. Even he couldn't tell his cultivation level. So, just how strong was he? To be able to come out of that place alive, it was obvious that he wasn't an ordinary person. He really didn't think that he would have misjudged him. When he first saw him, he thought that this youth looked simple and honest, so he helped him. Now that he thought about it, if he hadn't brought him in, he probably would have had the ability to go in by himself, right? The 2 of them drank wine and ate meat in the courtyard, but didn't chat much. When the sky darkened, she said to Elder Tan, I'm leaving. I'm going out for a stroll. She wanted to go out and gather information and wait for the next move. Elder Tan looked at her and only nodded, saying, "Be careful." Then he turned and went into the room. Feng Jiu smiled, then stepped out of the courtyard, closing the door behind her, and walked into the night market. At this moment, in another part of the Temple of Dark Night, a masked man held a portrait in his hand and looked at it. When he saw the beautiful woman in the portrait, he narrowed his eyes and murmured in a low voice, "Is this your true appearance, Feng Jiu? You really are peerless and unparalleled in your generation." Huh, I really didn't think that I would be defeated by a woman one day. He looked at the woman's crafty and clear eyes in the portrait as if she was mocking him. He tugged at the corner of his mouth, revealing a smile. His finger brushed across the woman's face in the portrait, brushing past the confidence between the beautiful woman's brows, then landing on the slightly raised corners of her lips, revealing a demonic smile. "You're indeed extraordinary, extraordinary. Tell me, how should I repay you?" He murmured softly, his deep eyes seeming to be deep in thought, thinking of a way to deal with her. On the other side, Xianyuan Mose stood in a courtyard with his hands behind his back. He looked at the horizon, his brows slightly furrowed. He hadn't heard from Feng Jiu for so long. Where did she go? Calculating the time, he had already been here for quite some time. He had also asked his subordinates to inquire about her whereabouts, but they were still fruitless. Even Murong Yixian, who had brought her over, didn't know where she had gone. At this moment, Hui Lang ran in excitedly. "Master, master, there's news about the ghost doctor." Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose immediately turned his head, and a light flashed across his deep eyes. "She appeared? Where is it?" In his tone, there was an eagerness and joy that even he himself did not notice. The ghost doctor should have snuck into the Temple of Dark Night. The latest news is that the Temple of Dark Night's headquarters has been turned upside down. Moreover, there are many large craters caused by the explosion of fire cylinders at the scene. There are countless casualties, and it's a complete mess. Hui Lang said excitedly. His eyes were filled with admiration. "I knew that the ghost doctor was very powerful. There hasn't been any news for such a long time. Once there's news, it's earth-shattering. This news hasn't spread yet. It's only because our people over there noticed it that they investigated it and reported it back. Speak clearly. How is she? Where is she now?" Xianyuan Mose said with his hands behind his back. Compared to anything else, he was more worried about her safety. Chapter 1908. At this point, Hui Lang was incomparably excited. How could he not have a part in such a thing? It was a pity that he was not by the ghost doctor's side. Otherwise, he would have been able to display his skills. When Xianyuan Mose heard this, his expression softened. After causing such a ruckus there, she probably won't stay in that area anymore. Tell the subordinates to pay more attention and see if there are any unusual movements recently. "Yes," Hui Lang replied, then turned to leave. When he walked out, he saw Mo Chun dressed in white. He could not help but stop in his tracks. "Gongzi Mo Chun, why are you here?" He had always been at odds with his master. Why was he here again? "I had nothing to do, so I came to find your master to play chess." Mo Chun smiled warmly. His footsteps paused for a moment, then he looked inside. "Your master is here, right?" "Yes. Why don't I go in and report?" Hui Lang asked. "No need. Since he's inside, he definitely knows that I'm here. You can go about your business." He waved his hand and smiled warmly, then walked inside. Hui Lang rubbed his nose and muttered to himself, then walked outside. When Mo Chun arrived inside, Xianyuan Mose was sitting at the table in the courtyard. He placed 2 cups on the table and poured wine into them. Seeing this, Mo Chun smiled. "It's rare that you'll pour wine for me when I come here." "How rare?" He lifted his robe and sat down opposite him. He lifted the cup and sniffed lightly. The fragrance of the wine entered his nose. "If you have something to say, say it. I don't have time to chat with you," Xianyuan Mose said, then lifted the cup and took a sip. Hearing this, Mo Chun said, "It seems that you've also received the news about Agio. If there are no accidents, she will be back soon." Xin Yuan Mose glanced at him and did not say anything. But when he saw that he finished the cup of wine in 2 mouthfuls, his eyes flashed slightly. What kind of wine is this? It's very mellow and has a rich aftertaste, Chan said. After downing a cup of wine, she felt like she hadn't had enough. Thus, she poured herself another cup. It's really good wine. A smile appeared on Chen's face as she looked at Xin Yuan Mose. How could you bear to bring out such good wine to greet me? She downed 1 cup, then drank another. Xin Yuan Mose slowly tasted the wine. Before he could finish the glass in his hand, he saw that Chan was already pouring the 4th glass. She saw that his face was slightly flushed and his gaze was slightly dazed. She couldn't help but smile. This is immortal drunkenness, also known as 3 cups down. Right after she finished speaking, Chen's body swayed slightly, and she fell to the ground. Ing-yi, Xin Yuan Mose called out. Master. In the dark, Ing-yi came out. Throw him into the brothel for me. Have someone take good care of him. Xin Yuan Mose took a sip of the wine and said in a low and magnetic voice unhurriedly. Hearing this, the corner of Ing-yi's mouth twitched. He was wondering why his master would take out immortal drunken wine for young Master Chen to drink. So it turned out this was his plan. He lowered his head slightly and replied, Yes. He quickly walked forward and picked Chen up, bringing him to the brothel. On the other side, after Fengjiu and Lei Xiao gathered together, they began to discuss. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.